Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn and I am so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. I love and I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for coming to hang out with me today. I feel like it's been like, I don't know, a couple weeks. I don't know why I'm feeling that way. I'm just like missing you guys so much. I just love ya. Like I wish I could just have a video every day and just talk with you guys every single day. So I hope you guys are having a good week. I'm super excited to be here with you today. Gonna give everybody a minute to go and grab your drinks, go and grab your snacks. Today I am snacking on a classic for me. Subway white chip macadamia cookies. These are my freaking favorite from there and I always forget about them, and today I was craving a Subway sandwich. So it was like, Skip the Dishes was like, do you want a cookie? And then it's like in a do-pack. I was like, of course I do. Thank you. I've been like waiting to have this with you guys all night. So cheers. It was so freaking good. Little eating ASMR action. I can't do it, guys. Oh yeah, I'm back at it again with the little headscarf 2 weeks in a row. Who is she? Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so before we get started on today's case, I just want to put a disclaimer. I know I should be putting a disclaimer on every video. I guess I just assume that people who are watching are going to know that we're talking about true crime cases and that I might go into details of the crime scene and whatnot. But today I just kind of felt like not only are we going to be discussing like a crime scene, but there's quite a bit of content of sorts, so I'm not going to go like too crazy into detail about it, but I do need to discuss like certain toys, devices, sexual acts of sorts. So yeah, I just wanted to put a little disclaimer out there for you guys so I don't like, you know, catch you off guard. All right? Okay, so today is another one of those stories where I go like back and forth and I feel so lost and confused, but in the same sense, I feel like I kind of know the answer, but you don't want to go there and admit that that's probably what happened. So I've just been staying in this spot of denial while I've been researching this all week. And then I go back and forth and I'm like, oh, let's try to make sense of this scenario, and you just can't. So very curious to hear what you guys think at the end of this, as always, but big time on today's case. Oh, one more thing. Sorry. Usually I like to put as much content as I can for like photos and references for you guys to just kind of, you know, place yourself there and see. There really wasn't a lot for me to find out there. So today we are going to primarily be using a lot of our imagination. I'm going to include as much as I can, but as far as like layouts and the scene and stuff like that, there's really not much out there. So just wanted to put that out there. You may not be seeing as many photos as I usually provide. Okay, I think now we can get started. Today's case is on Robert Wone. Robert was a very successful lawyer. He was living in Oakton with his wife, Catherine. And on the night of August 3rd, while he was staying at his friend Joseph Price's house, a 911 call goes out to report that Robert had been stabbed in the guest room, allegedly by an intruder. There were 3 other men in the house that night, and none of them saw anything that happened. There was Joseph Price, his boyfriend, Victor Zaborski, and their third roommate, Dylan Ward, who was also described as their occasional third member to Victor and Joseph's relationship. Joseph and Victor claimed to have heard a faint scream, which is why they went to check on Robert in the first place. Dylan said that he did not hear anything until he heard the screams of Victor after he found Robert's body. But investigators feel like the whole scene was staged, and it appeared like there had been a big cleanup not only in the house, but on all 4 of the men as well. When they arrived, Victor and Dylan were in bathrobes and looked like they were freshly showered, and Robert, who was unconscious, also appeared to be freshly showered and redressed and placed on a bed with little to zero blood and evidence of what actually happened in that room. First though, I want to go back and talk a little bit about Robert and what actually brought him there on the night of August 3rd. Robert grew up in Brooklyn with his parents William and Amy Wone. The Wones were really successful. They were great examples of what hard work and dedication were to Robert. His dad worked as a technology executive at a bank and his mom was a librarian. And everything that I read about Robert just shows what an amazing man he was, not only like late in his life, but all throughout him growing up. He was a Mets fan and loved going to games with his family. He was also described as a very attentive and generous friend, and every teacher that ever had him also said he was such a dedicated and brilliant student. He went to a prep school in Brooklyn, and I got the impression reading about him that each year he was in school, he just excelled more and more. He won countless awards and was part of a bunch of extracurricular activities. And some of the things that I read about Robert that really shined light on the character that he was that he would do things like fill up expired parking meters so that when somebody got to their car, if it was expired, they weren't going to get a ticket. I also read that he took it upon himself to gather a group of friends and clean bird poop off of a statue so that it was nice and shiny on their campus. And he also led this revamp of a club that used to be really popular at the William and Mary's College, and it was called the 13th Club. And members would go around and they would complete random acts of kindness for strangers. Another really touching thing that I read was he had this ability to make people feel heard and appreciated and understood. There was this situation where a retired president of his school, I believe, Robert learned that he lived not far off of the campus and he had arthritis in his spine, and he knew that he lived alone. So Robert went over there and wanted to check in and see how he was doing. And when he got there, he really felt like this man was just so thankful and lonely and just craving human interaction. So he sat there and listened to him tell stories for hours. And after he went there that day, he took it upon himself to gather any other students that wanted to go and hang out with this man, and they would go once a week to check in and just chat and make him feel like he had some company. And I just thought, like, oh my God, like my freaking heart, just so precious. So on top of all of the wonderful things he does outside of school, of course, he is just an amazing student. He wins countless awards. I mean, there was like a list of the awards that this young man had won while he was in school. And it was also at this school at William and Mary's where he met Joseph Price. So Joseph was about 3 years older than Robert, and he was the one who showed Robert and his family around on campus when they first arrived. And I think Robert looked up to him as kind of like a little bit of a mentor. He reached out to him if he needed help on certain school projects, and Joseph was also a member of this 13th Club where they did random acts of kindness for people. Both Robert and Joseph graduated with law degrees. Robert got a job at a law firm called Covington and Burling, and Joseph got a job at a law firm called Arndt Fox, which he eventually made partner at. And throughout their careers and lives, the two of them remained really close friends. So let's go to January 2002. Robert is doing very well in his career, very successful lawyer. He appears to have it all and very happy in life, but he's missing that other half. I don't know if he specifically was looking for a partner, but as fate has it, he is at a bar association conference and he meets his future wife, Catherine Wu. Catherine was also a lawyer, and she was actually the one to invite him to this conference. They didn't know each other prior to it, but she had called to give him an invitation, and when she got off the phone, she was kind of like, I kind of like the way he sounds. And then when she saw him at the conference, she said she noticed him from across the room and was like, okay, well, yeah, the face matches the voice, like he's a cutie. So she went to introduce herself, and then by the end of the conference, it was like they were kind of actively low-key seeking each other out to continue conversation, but didn't want to be like, hey, they would just make excuses to bump into each other and keep the prior conversation going. And then by the end of it, they were just smitten. Kathy was in Chicago though, and Robert was in Washington. So they pretty fast formed this long distance relationship. And every month, I think they took turns flying out at least 3 times a month to see each other to like make sure that they had that one-on-one time. Robert caught her off guard, I think, just judging by what I read about her. I think that Kathy was more of the what if thinker. So she would analyze every situation, you know, like, okay, well, we live apart. What if this doesn't work? Where Robert was very positive and optimistic and is like, why? What if it does? You know, let's see how it goes. It might have had something to do with the fact that in junior high, Kathy was diagnosed with lupus. And I think she felt like it would hold back any promising prospect in her future and that maybe she wouldn't find somebody who accepted that. But when she told Robert about her illness, his response was, okay, are you interested in coming with me in November to take a month-long trip to China to meet my family? So he really showed her that not only was he not bothered and would support whatever she needed from him, but he was in it for the long haul and making long-term plans for them to go on a vacation and meet his family together. So they do make it to China. The trip is a success. And before the trip, they had just, you know, in those early stages of a relationship where you think, you know, okay, like this is the one for me, and you have the wedding talk, the planning the wedding and the kids and all that. They had done that. And again, I don't think that it was something that Kathy had thought she would ever experience, especially with Robert, who she thought was just such a catch. And so they had planned everything out, but one of Kathy's stipulations was, okay, well now, you know, I pretty much know everything and we've planned all of this. I want it to be a surprise. So when they come back from China, he doesn't do it on the trip. You know, like I think for Robert, that was just too cliche to be like, oh, I'm going to take her on a vacation and then I'm going to propose to her while we're out there. But what he does instead is he arranges for rose petals to be strewn all across her apartment. So when they arrive, they open the door and she sees all these rose petals and they lead to a kitchen table that has a bunch of long-stemmed roses, some fruit in a basket, and then there's an engagement ring with a note that says, "Will you marry me?" And then bless Robert's little heart, he was just like, did I surprise you? He is so freaking precious. 8 months later, in June 2003, they were married. Initially, Kathy moved to Robert's apartment in Washington, and then the following year, they bought a townhouse together in Oakton, which meant that they would need to commute about 45 minutes to work every day. So that was their routine. So the same month they get married, Robert celebrates his 30th birthday, and it's his college friend Joseph Price that decides to throw the party at his house for him that he shares with his partner Victor. Joseph, like Robert, is very successful and good at what he does. Like I mentioned, he became partner at the firm that he started with after graduating. He specialized in intellectual property litigation, but on his free time, his true passion was advocating for the LGBTQ community. His partner Victor, surprisingly, is not a lawyer. I feel like everybody in the story thus far has been, but he is very successful nonetheless. He works at the milk processors program in the marketing department, and if you are a child of the 90s or anybody who lived through the 90s, you absolutely know this campaign is the infamous Got Milk campaign, like we saw everywhere we turned. So Victor was a part of that. The two of them had been together for years. I even read that they had sons together that they biologically fathered, so that they didn't have them as their children, but they biologically fathered them for a lesbian couple, and Joseph fathered one and Victor fathered the other. So I found that quite cool. But yeah, the children didn't live with them. They lived with their moms, but I feel like they still were a part of their lives in some sense. I think they even called them dads. Victor and Joseph, they lived on their own, and they were described as like the hosts, and they loved to have people over and have gatherings. And Joseph's described as the one who liked to entertain and talk, and Victor was the one who was like the host with the most, you know, was that behind the scenes, preparing food, getting drinks, making sure everybody was taken care of. So at some point in their relationship, they have a gentleman move in with them, and his name is Dylan Ward. Dylan is described as kind of rootless. It looks like he definitely was trying to find his calling and where his passion laid in life. He was trying to be a children's author while also working as a massage therapist, and he also had gone to school and got a degree in culinary arts. So he definitely was trying to figure out different avenues to see, you know, like what fit him best. So my understanding is that when he first moved in, he rented out a basement suite in Victor and Joseph's townhouse, and at some point during that living arrangement, Dylan and Joseph formed a relationship. It appears that it was one that Victor approved of, but not that he was a part of, yet they still referred to themselves as a throuple to include the three, and they called each other family. So eventually they move out of that first house and they buy $1 million townhouse at 1509 Swan Street. And despite the open dynamic of the relationship, Victor and Joseph still remained, I think, like the solid two couple, and they were the ones to share the master suite. And Dylan now went from the basement to a second floor bedroom, but still had an open relationship with Joseph, if this is all making sense. And then they also had a woman named Sarah who rented out their basement in this townhouse. It's understood that Dylan was very much into the BDSM lifestyle, and he identified as a dominant and Joseph identified as the submissive. It sounds like Victor was not into this lifestyle at all, but I got the impression that maybe because it wasn't something for him, he was okay with Joseph exploring that with Dylan and, just trusted in their relationship and understood that this was something he really couldn't give him, nor was he interested in, so it was kind of like a pass. Nonetheless, this is going to play a big part in what people think happened to Robert that night. So let's get into why Robert was there. Robert had recently started a new job. He had been at Covington and Burling since graduation, but he came across an opportunity that would allow him to meld two of his passions together, which was his desire to help people in a nonprofit aspect, as well as incorporate his love and passion for his roots and his culture in Asia. This was something that would actually give him a pretty big pay cut, but Robert didn't care. I mean, all that we know about him, that doesn't really surprise us. He loved donating his time and his energy and efforts into helping other people. So this just seemed like a role that was curated for him, essentially. So he applies for a job at a place called Radio Free Asia. And I guess it's a station that broadcasts news and information to Asia. And he was their international communications lawyer. So with this new position, he wanted to better equip himself, and there was a continued education course that he could take for something that was just going to take him to that next level. So it was on the night of August 2nd that course was. My understanding is it was a night course, so it was going to finish later on in the evening, and instead of him commuting back on like a 45-minute trip, getting a little bit of sleep, waking up early, going back into the city to do it all again, he thought he was going to take the opportunity to spend the night in the city, and he also wanted to meet the night staff at the radio station, so he figured he could kind of get all of that in one shot. So a couple days before the course, he emails a female friend of his and lets her know that he'll be in the city on the 2nd and wondering if he can spend the night at her house, and she's unable to host him, so he then emails Joseph, and Joseph is like, yeah, sure. Kathy was aware of the plan. She helped Robert pack his overnight bag. They did their regular routine in the morning. They commuted to work together, kissed each other goodbye, and went upon their day. After work, Robert went to his course. He was done around 9:30, and he called Kathy and let her know that he was heading back to the office to meet the staff. He stays at the office till at least 10:24 when there's phone records that he called Joseph's phone. We can only assume is to let him know that he's heading to his house, and the distance from a cab from Robert's office to Joseph's house is about 8 minutes. So the earliest that he can arrive there is about 10:35. It was Dylan and Joseph that were awake when Robert arrived. They said they greeted Robert. They all had a glass of water in the kitchen. And then by 11 o'clock, they showed Robert to his room and went up to bed. I guess Victor had been up there the whole time, and he said that he was watching Project Runway. And he thought that Joseph arrived in their bedroom about 10 to 11 because he remembered him catching like the last 10 minutes of the show with him. Dylan said the last he heard from Robert's room was the shower starting as he was settling into bed, and he took a sleeping pill, he read a little bit of his book, and he fell asleep. At 11:05 and 11:07, 2 emails were drafted on Robert's BlackBerry. One was to Kathy to let her know that he arrived at Joseph's okay, and the other was to confirm lunch plans with somebody at work the next day, but they were never actually sent out. They were just in his drafts folder. So at some point after everybody has settled in and dozed off, Joseph and Victor say they hear the chime of their alarm go off. And this happens anytime somebody comes in or out of the house. It's not actually like the alarm engaged. It's just a notification that a door is opening. Even though their roommate wasn't supposed to be home that night, they just assumed that she had changed her mind and came home instead. So they didn't think much of it, and they didn't look at the time to see when this was. And then at 11:49, 911 gets a call from the house, and it's Victor, and he says he thinks an intruder has come in and stabbed their house guest. He says there's blood everywhere and they need help immediately. The 911 operator says to put a towel or a compress of sorts on Robert's body, and Victor says Joseph's doing that. About 5 minutes later, paramedics arrive and Victor meets them on the doorstep, and the first responders say they're greeted by Victor, who's in a bathrobe, and he looks like he's freshly showered. They ask him what's going on. He reiterates what he told the 911 operator, and he points them in the direction of the guest room where Robert is. So on their way up the stairs, they see Dylan, and he's also looking freshly showered in a bathrobe. And he's just got kind of like a dazed blank look on his face. When the paramedics ask him, what happened, he doesn't say anything, and he just silently points behind him in the direction of the guest bedroom. And then he gets up and he just goes and excuses himself in his bedroom. So when they get to the guest bedroom, they find Joseph there, but he's not holding a towel on Robert or anything. He's just sitting on the edge of the bed, again, kind of looking dazed. And Robert is almost kind of like at an angle on the bed. He's on top of the linens. The bed looks freshly made. And it's all super confusing because off to the side, they see valuables on the nightstand. They've got Robert's BlackBerry there, his watch, and not only one, but 2 wallets. I guess he always carried an extra wallet, one that had all of his important stuff, and then one that was like a dummy wallet. So if he was ever in a situation where he was robbed, he could give them the dummy one and then not lose as much cash and cards and stuff like that, which is very, very smart. But all of it is untouched. And then right beside that stuff is a knife. Joe says he's the one who actually placed the knife there after he went into the room and saw it on Robert. Robert is wearing a t-shirt. He's got boxers on, and he's also got like his night mouth guard in. So he appeared to be ready for bed. And on his t-shirt, there are like 3 perfect slits in it. And then when the paramedics look underneath, there's like 3 almost like incision looking wounds to Robert's torso. But super puzzling is that there's hardly any blood around that area, and there's basically nothing in the room. The only blood that they notice is a little bit on some of the bedding and a little bit on the towels off to the side of the room. Their first impressions were that it looked like Robert had been cleaned after an attack and then redressed and just like staged and positioned. So when those initial first responders come in, they say Joe is dazed. One of them is actually even very creeped out by him, almost to the fact where he doesn't want to turn his back to him. He always makes sure that he's like facing him and is able to, act quickly if he needs to. And something that's going to be important later when our minds are frazzled and we are questioning every single move is that with these early first responders, Joseph mentions that he didn't find Robert in the room and that he actually found him by the patio, and that he took him from the patio, brought him up the stairs, and placed him on the bed. I mean, there are so many questions there. We'll go through those in a little bit. But from what I read, that appears to be the first and only time Joseph shares that version of the story. At the house, the EMTs aren't getting a response from Robert, but they still want to do everything they can, so they do rush him to the hospital. And the 3 men stay behind so that they can answer investigators' questions. Dylan says that he didn't hear anything at all. It wasn't until he heard Victor screaming when he was on the phone with 911 that he realized there was even an emergency, and that's when he came out of his room. And when they questioned Joseph and Victor, Joseph never brings up that he found Robert at the patio again. Instead, they say that after they had heard the door chime, some time had passed, and then they heard a faint scream and groan, and they kind of like listened to see if it would happen again, and they heard it again, and then that's when they went, and they immediately went to look for Robert in the guest bedroom. So investigators bring cadaver dogs in on that very first night, and they alert to blood at a drain by the back stairwell and also at the lint trap of the dryer. So for investigators, they feel like this shows some form of cover-up. They think the killer or killers could have potentially had blood on themselves or on items around the house, and they went to go and rinse them off by this drain, and then they took them and they dried them off in the dryer, and then that's why there was some residue of blood that these dogs were alerting to on the lint trap. From there, they also do a huge sweep of the townhouse and remove any items that they find suspicious. Among them are several items from Dylan's room, and they're like BDSM novels or like how-to books, and then also some toys and machines, if you will. One of them is referred to as a milking machine, and I guess what it does is it like force ejaculates. And another of these machines is, I think, one that does a similar outcome, but it's done with like electric stimulation or pulses. I'm not 100% sure. Regardless, these items become very important. And then another item they take from his room that they find really suspicious is a 3-piece knife set, but it's missing one knife. Unfortunately, less than an hour after that initial 911 call comes in, Robert is pronounced dead at the hospital, and detectives take in the 3 men for questioning at the station. They interview all of them separately, and the reports from the 3 men is that the questioning immediately was very accusatory and sexually charged. It appeared that the detectives felt like the attack on Robert was some form of act gone wrong. And the detective's view on the 3 men is that they all seem very unattached, unemotional, and not willing to solve this crime. Joseph is explained as very aggressive and arrogant in the interview. Victor, who was very emotional on the 911 call, is now very unattached. And Dylan was also said to be very unfazed by the whole situation. The theory from all of the 3 men is very consistent and it matches. And it's basically that an intruder got in the house somehow. Joseph had said that he saw a spider on one of the porch lights outside earlier on in the evening, and he went to go and investigate it. Right off the hop, I'm just like, I can feel the spider on me. I don't know why you would ever want to go investigate it, but hey, maybe some people do that. Anyways, that's what Joseph said he did, and he thought that there was a chance that maybe when he came back in the house, he didn't lock that patio door, and that's how somebody got in. And I mean, if you look at that just at a theory, I guess you could be like, yeah, maybe that's a possibility. But then you look at how all of that would have to play out, and it would mean that an intruder came in through this back patio. They walked in on that main level, passing a plethora of expensive electronics, walked by them without grabbing any of them and taking them for themselves, and then they walk up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs is Dylan's bedroom. So I guess if you were on the hunt to attack somebody that night, maybe you would go for like the closest one, or at least make sure that no one's going to catch you in the act. But no, this intruder would have had to walk past Dylan's room, go to the end of the hall where Robert was in the guest bedroom, attack Robert, who seemingly would have to be incapacitated because there was no defensive wounds on him, and the injuries that he sustained were so clean that he wouldn't have been able to flinch and move. It would almost be that he would have had to just lay there and take the stabbing as it was. And then after that, the intruder would just clean up to make sure that everything looks okay and that it almost looks like somebody just magically made those injuries appear on Robert, and then he would leave the apartment undetected and escape through the night. So that's the theory that they're going off of, and it gets even crazier when the autopsy report comes back. So as I mentioned, there's no defensive wounds, and he's got these 3 perfect cuts to his body. All of them appeared to have been fatal, but he would have survived for at least a minute after the injuries occurred because his digestive system was full of blood, and he also had broken blood vessels in his eyes, which showed that for a period of time he was struggling to breathe. There was a lot of internal bleeding and very little sign of external bleeding like we had gone through earlier. So that can explain why maybe there wasn't as much blood as somebody would be anticipating. So when I hear that, it almost gives me the impression that there could have been a cleanup, or he was incapacitated and couldn't move. So all of that pooling happened internally and didn't have a chance to get out of his body because he's not running around, standing up, moving around to try to protect himself, which again, like, how do you get like that? Well, the autopsy shows 3 needle marks. So if somebody injected you with something to put you out, that's how you get like that. But when Robert's toxicology test is run and it's tested for mainstream date drugs or recreational drugs that could put somebody out like that and make them unconscious, nothing comes back positive. Now, I don't know why I ever thought that if you had a drug in your system and there was an autopsy performed and they ran it through a toxicology test, they would just automatically be able to figure out what the drug in your system that killed you was. It doesn't happen like that, I learned. So this doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't a drug used to paralyze or knock Robert out. What it means is that the essential or like mainstream common ones that are used on victims that they tested against weren't found. So there's a possibility that something was used that's not as well known and wasn't tested against, and that's why it didn't show. And then the next finding is one that just confirms to detectives that the theory that they have that this act gone wrong is actually what happened. And that's because there's skin that's found around Robert's pelvic region as well as in his anus. But the didn't belong to any of the 3 men. It was Robert's own. So detectives feel that the only way this could possibly be accomplished is if maybe one of those machines was used and forced Robert, and then it was placed within, and that's how it transferred and got there. So even though everything is pointing in the direction of their theory, the 3 men actually aren't arrested that night. They're all released, and the following day they get lawyers. This, when I've been reading about it, seems to be something that people feel proves their guilt. For me though, I look at a little bit objectively. Joseph is a very successful lawyer, so if you watch any true crime show or any like cop show or CSI or whatever it is, the first thing a lawyer always tells you to do is don't talk to the cop without a lawyer. So they already had done an initial interrogation, questioning, whatever you want to call it. And then after that, they did get lawyers. But I do want to put it out there that even though they had lawyers, they still did provide DNA samples and fingerprints after the fact to help the investigation. And something that I find suspicious about the whole fingerprint thing is that Joseph had admitted to grabbing the knife from Robert's body when he first got into the bedroom and placing it on the nightstand. He had admitted to touching it so that if investigators found his fingerprints, that's why it was there. But suspiciously, there was no fingerprints on this knife, and even the blood that was on there, it didn't seem like enough. There was very little of Robert's blood on the knife itself, and it almost appeared like it had been wiped on there from the towel that was in the bedroom. And then when they tested this knife, it came back that it didn't fit to be the knife that caused the wounds in Robert. And although there were no fingerprints on it, there were fibers on it. And the fibers were from the towel. There were no fibers from the t-shirt that Robert was wearing, which you would suspect would be there if it had to cut through a t-shirt into Robert. Are you following me? It doesn't make sense to me. So it's hard because I'm like, why? Like, let's say, for instance, Joseph was trying to, line himself up to say, like, don't worry, like, I'm admitting to touching this knife. I pulled it out of him so that I could put this towel compression on him. And you were already going with like an intruder scenario. Why not just why plant a knife and then, rub blood from a towel on it and put it there when you could easily just be like, there's no weapon here. The murderer took it when he left the house. So many questions. Another CSI moment in this case where I feel like it could have been really promising, but it was botched, was that they had done a luminol test in, I think, around the bedroom and other areas of the house, and they're looking for cleaned up blood. So when you spray the luminol and then you put it against this other chemical, it'll show like a bright blue light of signs that there's like leftover blood residue after a cleanup. So they do this, and sure enough, there's a whole bunch of areas that light up blue. But the wrong chemical was used, and I guess this chemical will also light up blue. So all of that evidence was completely destroyed. Now, I don't know if it's because all of these theories aren't really leading anywhere, and there's situations where these botched parts of these investigations are happening, but in these early days, Kathy is very supportive of Joseph and Victor and Dylan. I think for her, she just wanted answers. Right away, she actually invites them to her parents' house so she can talk to them and try to all figure out what happened that night. Basically, she gets the exact same answers as the detectives are getting, and they're sticking with the intruder theory. I'm not really sure if Kathy believed it in those early days. I don't think she's ever done an interview to talk about it, but my impression is I think she wanted to believe it, especially because Jo was such a good friend of Robert's for so long. She really loved their friendship. She loved all of Robert's friendship. She said like she would catch herself just kind of sitting back and admiring like how much everybody appreciated Robert, and Jo was one of those people. So she actually even asks Jo to be a pallbearer for Robert's funeral, and he agrees. As far as the investigation, it's kind of at a standstill. And then in October of that year, Jo's brother Michael uses a key that he was given to break into Joseph's apartment and steal a bunch of valuables so he can support a drug habit that has come back. So friends and family who have been supporting the three all like, man, like maybe it wasn't an intruder at all, like could Michael have been the one to do this? Initially, it sounds like it could be something that's promising. A further look into Michael, you discover that he was a phlebotomy student. So, I mean, he's familiar with his way around a needle, and that could explain how Robert was incapacitated. It sounds suspicious, but it doesn't go anywhere. There's no evidence that ties Michael to the crime that night, and the theory that he was breaking in to support a drug habit just doesn't really stick because nothing was missing. So the case stays dormant for about 2 years, and then in 2008, charges are filed against Dylan Ward. By this point, the three aren't living together, but it appeared like there still was some form of connection there though, because Dylan was living in Florida in a townhouse that all three of them owned, but Victor and Joseph were living together in DC. So Dylan's charged, but he's not charged with murder. He's charged with obstruction of justice, and it seems like they chose these charges in the hopes that maybe if Dylan is charged on his own, he's like the third wheel, he might turn on Victor and Joseph and give more details about something that he could potentially be hiding from that night. He doesn't. And the next month, Victor and Joseph are charged with the exact same charge. And it seems like between these 2 years, Kathy has had a change of heart and she no longer believes in their innocence. So after they get these charges laid against them, she also files a wrongful death suit in a civil court for $20 million. 2 years after those charges are laid, they do end up going to trial. The judge finds all three not guilty. However, she doesn't say necessarily that she means they don't know or have any involvement in the crime itself. She says that the evidence that was brought forth to her doesn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they did it, but she did feel that either one or all three of the men knew what happened that night. The following year after that, the three go to court with Kathy, and Kathy settles for an undisclosed amount. So now everything is essentially closed. Robert's case itself isn't, but the investigation is at a point where everything is just theory, and it doesn't look like from this point forward anything can come to light unless somebody physically comes forward and says what happened. And I have so many questions. The questions are overwhelming. And I think a part of it is that when I've read about these three men, I just don't want to believe that they did anything wrong. You know, like I want to believe their theory and their stories, but it doesn't make sense. But I still try to struggle to make sense of it. And I can't. Like, you don't want to believe that you just go to your good friend's house one night and something like this can happen and they could be involved. Like, you just don't want to go there. But if we go with their theory that it's an intruder, why didn't you rush into Dylan's room first, who is like family that you call, and this third part of the throuple that you're in? If we're to believe the first version that Joseph initially told, that he saw Robert by the patio, you'd have to believe that he was going around looking for Robert specifically. So he automatically thinks of Robert before he's thinking of Dylan, his lover, and then he finds Robert by the patio, doesn't try to administer any help there, instead carries or drags a limp body up the stairs past Dylan to the guest bedroom. Again, if this is an intruder, are you going to check to make sure they haven't got Dylan? No, you just call 911 and say that there's only one person. Like in my mind, I'd be like going through every single bedroom in my house, making sure everybody I cared and loved for was okay. But that didn't happen. And then, I mean, same goes for if we want to pretend like he never said anything about the patio whatsoever, and then we just assume that he ran past Dylan's room straight to Robert's room to check on Robert and not Dylan. Again, doesn't make any sense. And the knife, like, if you're wanting to get rid of the original murder weapon, why not just make it disappear altogether? Like, why take the time to plant another one at all? My understanding is the original one has never been found. The missing one from the 3-piece set that was in Dylan's room supposedly was turned into the investigators by Dylan's mom, who said that Dylan had gifted it to her, which again is puzzling, because if you've got a 3-piece knife set, why would you just take one out and give it to your mom and keep the other 2 for yourself? More questions. The emails also on Robert's BlackBerry have been a big question for people who theorize what happened, and they think that it is something that was also planted and staged, because I guess with BlackBerry, you can write out a draft of an email and change the time in it so that it can be altered either like earlier or later than it's actually being written. And then you go back and you change the time on the BlackBerry, but that will stay altered. So it's speculated that one or all 3 of the men were aware of this, and then they just wrote these drafts kind of to throw investigators off on like the time frame of when Robert would have been, you know, like alive and chipper and well. So I guess my biggest question is just like, why? I guess that's the biggest question on all of these cases, like why? But specifically this one, what happened? I mean, if he got there at like 10:40, he's literally there for a little bit over an hour. What happened? Like, the theory from the police is that he is drugged and either paralyzed or knocked unconscious, and then these acts are performed against him, and they maybe suspect that he could have woken up and gotten upset and maybe threatened to press charges or something like that. But it makes me just as confused as anything. Like, that doesn't even still make sense, because it's like, why? Like, the man was wearing his PJs, his mouth guard, clearly ready to go to bed for the night. So you'd have to assume that one or all of these men make their way into the bedroom, quickly inject him with something and knock him out, perform these acts on him, hook him up to a milking device of sorts, and then when he wakes up, they just take it to murder. I don't know. But then if you go to the intruder, it's like, why the intruder too? The only thing that I could try to make sense, and then it like completely knocked me back into like Puzzleville, was that I was like, okay, like maybe it was an intruder. Let's say Robert was at the patio that night. I have a feeling the patio in some way is connected. I don't know how, but so I thought, okay, the patio. Maybe intruder was trying to make his way in and then was caught off guard and saw Robert, and maybe it could have been his brother Michael. Who knows? Because there were these needle marks found on him. So it's like, you know, this intruder is caught off guard and happens to have a needle on him that he can quickly stab in multiple. As I'm saying it, you guys are clearly is not believing this as me, but we're going with this, okay? Let's just go with this theory, okay? So he's like jabbed a few times, knocked out, paralyzed, stabbed, and any blood that was in the area, because I mean, you're not going to have zero blood. Even if he's like laying down and most of it's internal, you're still going to have a bit of a mess. But okay, so there's some. But this intruder is now going to go around and instead of finding items to take to steal, because that's why you would be an intruder in the first place, you go and find things to clean up a crime scene with, and you clean up the crime scene and then you just leave undetected. Yeah, I can't. It hurts my brain. I want to figure it out and make sense and have this like light bulb moment so bad, because Robert just looked like the sweetest, most kind-hearted man and just somebody that you would want on your team. And when you learn about him, you almost like get to become friends with him. That's how I felt. Like, I felt like he became my friend because I wanted to be his friend so bad because of how amazing he is. And I just want answers for him at the end of the day. I mean, we want answers for all of these cases, and this is no different. But it's like, it's almost understandable why it's so impossible, because every theory, you just can't clearly map out exactly what happened, what the motive was, how it all played out, and why. I think it's gonna lay in the hands of one of these three men. Like I mentioned, they're free and they are still living their lives. It looks like Joseph and Dylan still go by Joseph and Dylan, but they've changed their last names, and I think they're still in like similar fields as they were before. And I came across Victor's Facebook, and he looks like he's still working for Milk. He doesn't have any like personal photos on there of him with Joseph or Dylan. It all just seems to be like ad campaigns for Milk. But I mean, throughout all of this, it looks like he's kept his job. And I feel like if any of the three men weren't involved, he just kind of, something about him makes me feel like he could be the one to crack and solve this case, because I don't think he was an active participant in it. I think that he possibly was for a cleanup and cover up after the fact, but I just don't I don't think that if any three of them were involved in it, Victor was. That's just my thoughts. It's the only thing that I can kind of make sense of. And I mean, even then, we don't know. I need your guys' help on this one. You guys gotta You gotta get in the comments. I want to know your thoughts. We gotta solve this. We've got to be the ones to do this for Robert, you guys. I just feel so connected to him. And it's so frustrating how it almost, like, it just seems like it can be so easy to solve, yet there's so many questions and you just can't. I don't know. I want to know your guys' thoughts. Please help me out. That is it for me today, you guys. I have decided to switch my schedule up a little bit for the time being. I don't know if I will go back to the way it was before or what we're going to do. I think we're just going to play it by ear for now. And instead of every Wednesday and every Saturday uploading, I'm going to stick with my Wednesday schedule, and I will have Saturdays as like a surprise Saturday. So I might upload every single Saturday and I might miss some Saturdays. And if I upload on a Saturday, it'll be a surprise for all of us. I do miss you guys so much, but I want to focus so hard on giving justice to these cases and covering as much as I can. And it does take so much time behind the scenes of researching and getting as many answers to the questions that I have for you. So I find that between like editing and trying to juggle everything, I get a little bit overwhelmed. It had nothing to do with my panic attack. Don't you guys worry. I love you so freaking much. I love YouTube. I love my channel. I'm loving it all. I'm just needing to find a little bit of a balance. So I will still see you on Saturdays. It just won't be as consistent as it was. So make sure that you click that notification bell so that anytime I do upload and it's a surprise, you guys are the first to know and you can come and hang out with me. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so freaking much. I will most likely see you on Wednesday and I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.